My friend Marion, who's 98 years old, will tell you that she was born a non-person. Born before 1928, she was among the last group of women born at that point that would be, according to the Government of Canada, considered a non-person, as only persons can serve in the Senate, and the federal government at that point had determined that only men are persons, specifically white men. Therefore, Marion, like thousands of other women, thousands of other people of color, was a non-person. While many women could vote by the late 1920s, and let's be clear, that was done with blood, sweat, protest, and at least a few jailbreaks, there were campaigns everywhere demanding that women know their place. The war was done. Get back to the kitchen. The men need their jobs. It was their job to restore civility out of chaos, after all. And that women who do want to be involved in politics or the law or academia or science were fighting against nature itself. They were being crude, crash, too masculine. Give up, ladies. Go back to the kitchen. Go to the schoolroom if you really must work. Leave the real politics, the real worry to the men. Don't worry about your pretty little heads. Leave that to them. Thank God they didn't listen. Now, these early activists may not have been perfect, but they were stubborn. They were resilient. And along with activists over the decades, fighting for Indigenous and queer and disabled women among everyone else that has ever arrived here and has lived here and will live here, it is one of the reasons that Canada is considered one of the most equal countries across gender. One would hope this fight would end, but as always, that would make it a short and boring sermon here today. Alongside women demanding their space in political spheres at this time, there were women working in the church who had dreams and callings of their own. At this point, almost no churches allowed women to be titled reverend. It was simply unheard of for the majority of mainline denominations out there, including the Congregationalists, the Methodists, and the Presbyterians that in 1925 became the United Church of Canada. The odd Methodist preacher, an outlier. The odd woman that would be in the pulpit and not know when to shut up, ignore her. But reverend is reserved for men. Methodists would allow them to preach on occasion, and they're allowed to run the Sunday schools, and they're allowed to run some of the governance stuff, but very, very small scale. They would serve in missionary committees. They would run the pastoral care programs. They would fundraise and bake sale and run their own little commissions. But again, the titles, the authority, the final say was reserved for men. The best you can get, as one woman suggested to my own dad when I was preparing for seminary, was to be a minister's wife, which is a tough role, and I'm not cut out to be one. This would not do for Miss Lydia Gruchy. She graduated with her degree in theology, and she wanted to serve as a minister after her brother died, and she wanted to take over the mantle. She ended up serving 6 appointments in northern Saskatchewan, not as an ordained minister, but as the equivalent of a lay leader, as a preacher that can go around. No sacraments, but she served 6 appointments, and as far as I'm concerned, that makes her the bravest minister I ever knew. She was not allowed to be ordained, time and time again. We were formed in 25. 1 year later, in 1926, she asked for the first time to be ordained in the UCC. After all, the UCC had not started ordaining people yet. That was still being formed. They could certainly ordain women. She was declined. Nellie McClung, who is of the famous Five, was also at that UCC gathering the first time, and she will note that it was not the men who said no. It was the women that were there that voted to not let her be ordained. Only in 1936 was the UCC ordaining anyone who was a woman. Reverend Lydia Gruchy became the first woman ordained in the UCC. Why turn her down? There are a lot of dissenting arguments. Some, I'm going to be honest, are boring. It's scripture, only the apostles were men, yada, yada, yada. Ignore that. Two arguments came up that were interesting to me. One from H.A. Kent, who was a principal at one of the theological schools at that time in 1928, wrote, and this is more of that, I love this quote, "What the church needs at the present time is not more femininity, but more masculinity. Women's work in the church is carried on with admirable zeal and faithfulness. What are men doing?" This idea, this argument, is that women had their own spheres, and to be fair, they did. You had the Women's Missionary Society, which became the Ladies' Aid, and then the Dominion Council of Women's Association, which positioned itself working alongside the clergy for the advancement of the UCC. They were told they couldn't be ministers, so they said, we'll make our own committees, we'll get the job done ourselves. There were organizations that were governed by women solely for the benefit of women that were working on missionary groups here, abroad, educational systems, fundraising, you name it, they did it. And again, men were not allowed in those groups because men could be ministers. So if a woman could be ordained as a minister, well, what's left for the men? What's left as their group? Frankly, all these women were doing a beautiful job making sure the roofs literally stayed open. If women got ordained, men would be pushed out, was the argument. I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions on that one, but I think it's safe to say that that hasn't worked so far. I think we're okay. The roof hasn't collapsed. The more insidious argument is the one I want to bring us for today, for Lent. Ministry is such hard work, after all. It's thankless. It's so tiring. The hours are endless. You are driving from town to town. It's not safe. It's exhausting. Let alone if you want to get married and have children, someone has to raise them at home. You must be exhausted. Leave that for someone else. Leave that for someone who can manage it. Don't worry about it, right? Why make them suffer? Won't Miss Gruchy be tired? They can stay where they belong. We'll keep them safe. We'll keep them separate. Aren't you tired? Aren't you exhausted? Why don't you just give up? That is the benevolent argument that snakes its way around the heart. It can pierce deeper than any barb. Have a sexist individual come up here and tell me I'm burning in hell for making all of you listen to me, and I won't give them the time of day. Yeah, whatever. What are they going to do? I know they don't like me. I know they don't want me up here. I've heard it enough in emails and in social media. I've heard enough of it. It bounces off of me at this point in the time. But that other argument, isn't this work exhausting? Maybe it's too much. If you're going to be hurt by it emotionally all the time, maybe you need to stop, try something easier. Maybe we can let others who are better equipped to handle it take over. Let them do that. You don't need to hurt yourself. It's okay. They'll take care of it. That is a lullaby. It soothes the heart. It says, I can give up. It says I can let this go. After all, ministry is hard work, especially for my colleagues that are in congregations with multi-point charges where the roof is literally collapsing around them and they're dealing with rampant sexism and homophobia and racism around them. For my colleagues that have to march in the streets every day. For my colleagues who know that if they give up, then all of this is for waste. Whether it's here in a congregation or at the hospital bedside, it can be a lot and it can demand a lot. Just as there are other careers that are far more demanding, frankly, you could not pay me to go back into working in a restaurant. My parents did retail for decades. You could not pay me enough to do that for one day. For everyone that's here as a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, an accountant, especially right now with tax season, for the stay-at-home parents who have been told that their job is so easy that everyone should quit and do it instead if their job is so hard, those jobs are also incredibly exhausting. You have done so much. But the option to not worry, to not suffer in a job, the option to quit, it sneaks in like a thief in the night. It whispers across the tired desert. No wonder Jesus listened to the devil, if only to hear him out. It's Satan reminding Jesus how tired and hungry he must be. So don't worry. You can turn the stone to bread. Be full. It's Satan saying to Jesus, you don't have to suffer to rule. I will snap my fingers and you will rule. All you have to do is say no to God and say yes to me. It is Satan taking Jesus to the top of the tower and saying, you don't have to die for your ministry. I know you don't have to die. Tell your God to save you, and no one has to get hurt. No worries. The benevolent arguments work so well and are so insidious because they speak to that desire, not to never work again. I love this job, but to not feel pain, to not suffer, to not hurt, it's not about never doing a career that makes you creative and stretches you. It's about knowing that you will have food on the table at the end of the day, no matter what. It's knowing that your job doesn't allow you to be exploited and abused. It is knowing that your health care is not attached to whether or not you let a customer yell at you for 10 hours a day. It is knowing that there is no pain, and all you have to do is let go, right? It's not about abandoning our dreams or goals. I know for the majority of us here, we chose our careers, yes, because they paid the bills, but also because we loved it, and we still do. And that is beautiful. But we don't want to argue with our friends and our families and our neighbors and our coworkers. It is not wrong to want to stop. And for some of us, changing careers, doing something for the sake of our own mental well-being and mental health is the right move. But who is telling us it's the right move and why? That is what we must consider. Satan doesn't care about Jesus' health and well-being. He cares about whether or not he can bend and break Christ. The detractors of early women in the church did not care about whether these women would be okay if they could go home at the end of the day. They cared about having their power threatened. They cared about not having autonomy and control over a group that they've always been told that they will control. It's either outright there or baked into the layers of sexism. After all, if a woman can't take care of herself, who will take care of her? The man. And if the man is the one that takes care of her, maybe the man is the one that votes and serves the Senate. Maybe the man is the one that makes the decisions, which does a disservice to both men and women and everyone in between. This is what makes it such a challenge to resist temptation. There is a kernel of truth, itty-bitty little kernel, being said here, that ministry, that our job, whatever your job is tiring. Whether it's the medical field or the legal field, in retail, you're working construction, you're a stay-at-home parent, you're a student, it is tiring. And it's okay to want to rest. Sometimes simply existing here is tiring. These are tiring things, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. It would be easier to ignore the ills of the world, to stop caring. But the conclusion is wrong. The speaker is wrong. Satan is wrong. It's tiring, so give up and let others think and do stuff for you? No. It's tiring, so we take breaks. We rest here with Jesus, our bread of life. We sit in communion together, a community of hopeful believers that love conquers all, even death itself. We work together to make it easier for everyone so that no one feels they have to choose a voice that is wrapped in velvet but has steel piercing their heart. They can choose the career because they want to. They can choose to stay home because they want to. They can choose to care because they're called to, not because they're forced to. This is where Christ is calling us. Being a non-person, as Marion was at the back of my story, when she was born, it means you are not given permission to care. You are not given the right to have the responsibility. But you are a person, as am I. We are given permission to care, to be tired, to rest, and to get back at it. It is a right we have to have the responsibility to care for others and ourselves. It is a gift and a blessing from God to make this corner of the world a wee little bit better. It means that Reverend Gruchy didn't need to become a minister to make the world better, but by doing so, she made it even better for everyone. This Lenten season, we're called to discern who is telling us to give up, whether it's our job, the political cause, being an independent community, being an independent nation, and who is saying, take a breath, take a break, and then get back at it, because with me, I will carry your burden, for it is heavy and my yoke is light. For it is God that says, here we rest. Feel my unconditional love and know that you are my beloved. No one, regardless of gender, is a non-person in my eyes. Rest, discern, pray. When we're ready, tell Satan to back off. We got work to do. Amen.